Everybody, welcome to my latest video. I'm going to show you guys my professional painting process, and I'm really excited to take you on this journey. I will take you on my step-by-step process and show you how to get from this to this. It's about 5 simple steps, and I will take you through each one, break it down for you as quickly and efficiently as possible, telling you what it is that I'm doing and maybe a few tips and tricks along the way as well. Show you some things you like, maybe some things you don't, but just take what works for you and try to apply it to your process and give it a shot. And who knows, maybe you might learn a thing or two that's valuable. This piece that I completed today that we're going to go through with this tutorial, it took me around 12 hours to complete, which is actually a pretty decent time frame, I'd say, for a piece of this quality. It's a piece of key art that I'm going to use in my upcoming game, Conquest of Eldar. So the steps in my process are this: the reference and or rough sketch, blockout, painting, and lighting. I have one quick thing to mention before we get started, though. I think this is a really criminally underrated and unknown about kind of process and or tool, and I'd like to show it to you guys real quick, because if you don't use something like this, I really think you should. There's a couple of alternatives, like I know Wacom has some sort of like a short key remote thing that you can use with your left hand. But if you're right-handed like me, I really think you should be training your left hand to be doing something as well, and it will greatly speed up your process. In particular, I use the Razer Tartarus. There's plenty of things I like about the tool. There's not an overabundant amount of buttons. It's nice and small and convenient and can sit off to the left of your tablet. It's not like a keyboard where you have the rest of it and it's like stretching behind it and it just doesn't work. The Razer Tartarus, and it has a scroll wheel. You know, press Alt for color picking, Control S, you're saving right there. If you start attaching things like brush size increases and opacities, switching between brush and eraser tool, you know, lasso tool, magic wand, spot healing, blur, sharpen. There's so many things that you can be binding to this little segment of keyboard right here. You know, the goal here should be that your pen never really leaves the active center area. You know, on only the most rare of tools and or items that you're using in Photoshop should you actually be moving your pen to go select. The only time I want you guys doing that is if you're selecting a different layer with your pen, or you're using something rare like the text tool or something. In my process, I almost never go and press any buttons. Every single thing, like Control S, all of my primary brushes, everything is keybound. My pen is always on the canvas and is always painting 99% of the time. So yeah, if you guys aren't using something like a Razer Tartarus or some other left hand key binding source, then you really should owe it to yourself to try something like that out. The first stage is the reference stage. And or if you don't have any good references, then it's just a rough sketch. Just spend more time sketching as a substitute for reference. But I really do recommend reference. I used a tool here, it's called Just Sketch Me, and I highly recommend it, although I would recommend that you still have a strong understanding of your anatomy principles before you start using a tool like this. It should not be a substitute for understanding anatomy. It should just be a tool that you can use to expedite and speed up that process if you are already proficient in it. So you need to have a good understanding of anatomy so that you can kind of correct it if it's not giving you what you want. And plus, sometimes I think going outside of the bounds of what your anatomical reference has given you and taking some creative liberties in the exaggerations of your poses or whatever will yield to a more unique and creative piece. But I think even if you're using Just Sketch Me, I think you should always be looking at, you know, the internet is full of artists and or real life references that give you great dynamic pose influence, whether it's a humanoid or a beast character. It's regardless. Reference is huge. I remember something my teacher taught me in college. He said that it's actually impossible for a human being to have a creative thought, that everything that you think is a creative thought, your brain is actually just kind of reorganizing or recycling things that it's seen before, just in new combinations. So instead of going in blind and just, you know, making something up that's original off the top of your mind, you know, that the point I'm trying to make is it's not original. You think it's original, but it's not. You should be looking for reference material online and utilizing that, the parts of it that you do like, and scrapping the parts that you don't like and making something new out of pieces that already exist to make sure that you get something that looks awesome. So I think that about covers it there. Let's move on to this sketch. So we're drawing the character. We're just going to be drawing it as if it were line art, but in my process, I'm not too obsessed with making sure I have the cleanest lines in the world. Remember, the name of the game here is speed. We are trying to make the best piece we can in the shortest amount of time that we can. And for this particular process that I'm showing you guys, having the utmost pristine line work ever is not necessarily a priority. Now, it's not going to hurt you for having clean line art. In fact, it will make the next stage move faster if you have clean line art. However, it's not exactly, but it's not going to break it. And it's going to take you longer too if you're spending too much time working on your lines. So I'd recommend, that you zoom out, you get a nice fat pencil looking brush, and you just kind of sketch out what you need. We're just trying to establish the forms here and make sure that the character looks good, and so that way you have something to work off of. You're just separating the details. I would say this, however, establish your focal point in the piece. Usually that's going to be like the face of the character or the bust area or something like that. That's going to be the most important part where most people's eyes are going to gravitate. So I'd say there, shrink your brush, get more specific, get more precise, have a, zoom in and get a little bit more careful with your detail on whatever that focal point is. However, when it's coming down to the feet or something that's on the edge of the painting, you can get a little bit more zoom out. Don't be so detailed, get a little bit more loose. In my piece in particular, again, I'm doing key art, so I'm trying to make sure that it looks good at all sizes. And that's not something that everyone has to deal with, but I'm dealing with in this particular piece. I'd recommend that you are flipping. This is no-brainer. Every YouTube artist ever is going to tell you this, but I'll beat the dead horse. Flip your canvas and flip it often. And then I'll add to that and say zoom in often, and zoom out often as well. The longer your brain is staring at this piece, the more comfortable it's going to get with its flaws. And we want to catch those early, right now in the sketching phase, and get them out of there as soon as possible by constantly refreshing your brain's view on this piece. So by zooming in, you might get a new perspective. By zooming out, you might get a new perspective. Flipping the canvas, you're going to get a new perspective on that piece, and you won't be so comfortable with the painting's issues, because we really want to make sure that the sketch looks good, because if it doesn't look good here, it's not going to look good anywhere. And you really don't want to screw it up in the sketch phase, because it's going to be really, really hard to fix those issues the deeper you get into the painting process. All right, well, after we have a decent line art pass and we've made sure that the proportions look good and the detailing is fine, we can move on to the block out. So for me, I'm a very organized person. I like to separate all of the different color groups. So on this character in specific, we have about, 5 or 6 or 7 or so different color groups. We have her skin. There's some leather straps. So we got the browns. She has marble armor. So it's like this greenish white coloring. And then she has some gold accents and some green gems, and she has her hair. So we're going to separate each and every one of those into a layer and focus on the silhouette and massing it out. And also I layer the block out based on the depth, because that's also going to help speed you up. So think about it like this. Whatever is closest towards the camera should be towards the top, and whatever is deepest in the canvas should be towards the bottom. So for example, in this instance, it's not perfect, but in this instance, the majority of the character, her skin, and then this is common, right? Doing a character like this, her skin would be the deepest in. And then there's some leather on top of the skin. And then there's some marble on top of the leather. And then there's gold on top of the marble. And then there's emeralds on top of the gold. So that's the way that we're going to layer it. And that just means that once we start painting, and as we're doing this block out, it'll be easier and easier to establish all these pieces and separate them out. And then what we do in Photoshop is activate this handy little opacity lock, meaning that all of our paint and brush strokes will be trapped within those color regions. So now we don't have to worry about keeping our paint strokes accurate and making sure that we're staying within the bounds of our certain color regions, and we don't have to watch the edges too much, because the way that this process works is that we permanently have all of our different color regions captured and separated, and we can paint within them freely with as big a brushes as we want. We never have to worry about accidentally bleeding over into a different color region, which is really nice. And again, speed is the name of the game. That's what we're aiming for here. But yeah, the blockout is going to really help speed up that painting process by making it so that way we don't have to worry about the edges too much, because we're going to handle essentially all of the information and all of the grouping. We're going to handle that here in the blockout phase, so that way once we get to the painting phase, you don't have to worry about that, and the only thing that we're worrying about is details and materials and lighting and whatnot. All right, so for the painting phase, I usually like to, after we've established our color palette and all of that, by selecting our kind of base color. Should have mentioned this before. Establish a color palette using your base color, a darker version of that color, maybe tweak the saturation a little bit, and then a brighter version of that color as well, so that you have like your mid, your dark, and your light. The lighter color is usually saturation is turned down. It moves more towards the top left of your color square, and then the darker color moves towards the bottom right. I think this lends itself well. So moving on to painting, I usually like to start with my dark and then do a whole pass of that. You can maybe allude towards some details and all that as well. And then I do my lights on top of the dark. And then I will also say that here you have two things that you really have to take into consideration, which is detail and material. Generally speaking, I would argue that it kind of comes down to the density of the material that's going to affect where your colorization is. So the softer the material, like let's say we're working with a cloth or something, the dark and light aren't going to be that far apart from one another. It's pretty tame. And then more like metal or metallic surfaces, your darks and your lights are going to be really far apart. So for example, I'd say on this character, the leather material is fairly softer. So the dark and the light for the leather isn't going to be too far apart. And then the gold or the emeralds have a really spread apart dark and light to really give it like this shine factor. And another thing, a quick note on shine and materials, when you're working with like gold on this character, she needs to have, you got to be really aggressive with your light and kind of hit it just like with some spots and do like these streaks and all that, and that'll give you like the sheens and the gleams or whatnot of the gold that kind of give it that very vibrant and metallic looking feel. But of course, everything I do, it's all painted, very painterly. Yeah, and I think once you're doing the painting as well, you need to keep in mind what you feel like your lighting situation is going to be for this piece. Is the lighting coming from the top left and the shadows coming from the bottom right? Okay, we'll keep that in mind. You don't have to religiously follow it, but you need to keep that in mind as you're painting and kind of try to paint the materials and the surfaces and keep that lighting arrangement in consideration while you're painting everything out. It's not too important to have your colors accurate here, because right after this painting phase, I'm going to show you guys something about gradient maps, which will help correct any mistakes. I mean, I'm usually pretty confident with my colors, so I don't come into gradient maps too often, but gradient maps can easily take whatever we've done and fix those colors right away if we maybe messed up when we were creating our color palette at the beginning. I would definitely say that the painting process is the longest part of the piece. If I had to break everything down into a chart, it would probably be about the reference/sketching phase would probably be maybe about 20% of the process. The lighting and final phase, it would be about 10. And I'd say the painting phase is about 70%. So most of the painting process on any character is just rendering out the materials and the depth of the pieces and the texture and all that. That's definitely the most time-consuming phase. It's going to come down to your art style, I think, is what is going to dictate this the most. And maybe the more photorealistic you have, the more that rendering process is going to take. Or actually, maybe it's shorter because you're photorealistic, so you're using photorealistic brushes or something. I don't know. It's too subjective for me to be able to put like a fine point on it, that a simple rule that works for everyone, because that is just not realistic here in this case. All right, so moving on to our final phase is the lighting, and I would argue that if you've had any doubts about your character or about how it's looking, I mean, sometimes it can look kind of flat or just okay, but it's really in this final 10%, the lighting / like polish phase is what I would call it, is where it just really comes to life. I've recently been experimenting with this, but I think there's so many, I mean, I could make an entire video on this process alone, on like 10 different ways in which you can enhance your piece in the post-processing phase or whatever. But I mean, this is going on long enough, so I'm just going to try to wrap it up here quickly with just a couple of like blanket layers that I would add on top of any piece that will just help it pop even more. I break it down into 3 to 4 different layers, maybe more, but the 3 to 4 are a bump, which is a black and white overlay layer that we're going to turn down to around 20 to 50%, somewhere in that range, depending on the lighting situation of your character and how intense you want the contrast to look. You're just going to go through the bump and you're going to kind of darken the edges, brighten the middle parts, and maybe on certain pieces, on certain parts of the character, like a backlight or something, you could hit it with a hard white just on the edges. And then once you take that, you turn that into an overlay in your blending modes, and you turn it down to, like I said, 20 to 50% or so. I think I did like 35 or maybe 40 on this character. It really helps emphasize the depth and the dimensions of your piece and give it that vibrant contrast. So yeah, the bump layer is very important. Another layer that you can add is add a shadow layer, and I would recommend that you color sample your background and you get like a dark color. So if you're, for example, in this piece, you're in a jungle, I'm going to make the shadow layer be a dark green. Yeah, I set this shadow layer to linear burn. I mean, there's all sorts of different, I recommend essentially pick your dark shadow color that you want, and then scroll through the different blending modes, and you'll find something that looks good and works for you. And then do the same thing for the light, except you hit it on the opposite sides of the character and make sure you're establishing that kind of like visual hierarchy. And then just experiment with the lighting modes there too. Although when it comes to light, I would usually recommend overlay. That's going to be the one that works like the vast majority of the time. However, if you want to really enhance a piece and give it that extra little visual flare pop, I'd say add a secondary lighting source, give it a rim light to go through like the edges of the dark side of the character, go on the edges as if a light is kind of coming in from behind, and then pick a new color. Sometimes I like to get a little bit more creative or fun with it and do something that is very saturated and colorful and maybe serves as a good contrast or accent color on the character, and hit it with that. And then like pin light, vivid light, color dodge, those are all really fun things to give a character for the edge light. It will really just help it pop in the end. I think that's all I have to say today for this piece in particular. It's my first time doing an art tutorial. I hope you guys learned something new. If this process was interesting to you, go give it a try. I would love to see what you guys could come up with. Like I said, I got this done in about 12 hours, which is actually a pretty good time frame for me. Sometimes some of my pieces can last 30, 40 hours. So the fact that this one turned out this good in 12, I'm pretty proud of that. Also, let me know if you guys would like to see another one of these sometime soon, as I had a great time making it. But yeah, that will do it for me today. I hope you guys are having a good time, and be sure to go and wishlist Conquest of Eldar on Steam. Look forward to more gameplay and behind the scenes like trailers and content and stuff coming out for that soon. I'm so excited. The game is turning out great, and I can't wait to show you guys some more. All right, have a good fall, have a good Halloween. I'll catch you guys later. Bye.